Welcome to Real English Voices, where we help you speak English naturally and confidently. I'm Tom, and with me, as always, is Ria. Today, we're talking about something that changed my entire way of speaking English: how to share your thoughts without always saying, I think. Ria, you know what's funny? When I first learned English, every single sentence started with, I think. I think it's hot. I think we should go. I think this movie is good. It drove my English teacher absolutely crazy.
Oh my goodness, Tom. Same here. In my view, that's one of the most common habits among English learners. We get so comfortable with, I think, that we forget there are dozens of other ways to express the same idea. It seems to me that many learners don't realize how repetitive they sound until someone points it out. When I was studying in London, my flatmate once joked that I should pay her £1 every time I said, I think. I would have gone bankrupt in a week.
That's hilarious. But you're absolutely right. The truth is, native speakers use such a rich variety of phrases to express their opinions. From my perspective, learning these alternatives doesn't just make you sound more fluent, it actually helps you express different levels of certainty, formality, and emotion. It's like having different colors in your paint palette instead of just one.
Exactly. And here's what I find fascinating. Each phrase carries its own subtle meaning. When someone says, in my opinion, it feels slightly more formal than I think. When they say, it seems to me, there's a gentleness to it, almost like they're being careful not to sound too forceful. I'm convinced that understanding these nuances is what separates intermediate speakers from advanced ones.
You've hit on something really important there. From where I stand, the way you express an opinion can completely change how people receive it. Let me give you an example from my own life. Last month, I was in a work meeting, and I needed to disagree with my manager's proposal. If I had said, I think you're wrong, that would have sounded harsh and maybe even disrespectful. Instead, I said, from my point of view, there might be some challenges with this approach. The conversation stayed friendly, and we actually had a productive discussion.
That's such a perfect example. The way I see it, choosing the right phrase is like choosing the right tone of voice. You're still sharing your honest opinion, but you're doing it in a way that invites conversation rather than confrontation. I remember when I first started working in an English-speaking environment, I struggled with this so much. I would either sound too aggressive or too passive. There was no middle ground.
So what changed for you? How did you figure out which phrases to use and when?
It's interesting you ask that. I'd say the turning point came when I started paying attention to how native speakers actually talked in real situations. Not in textbooks, but in actual conversations, meetings, and even arguments. I noticed that when someone wanted to sound thoughtful and measured, they'd use phrases like, it seems to me, or from what I can tell. When they felt strongly about something, they'd say, I'm convinced that, or there's no doubt in my mind. As far as I'm concerned, listening and observing was more valuable than any grammar exercise.
Absolutely. And here's something I want our listeners to understand. Using these phrases isn't about showing off or sounding fancy. It's about clarity and connection. When I say, in my view, I'm signaling to the listener that I'm about to share something subjective, my personal take on things. When I say, it appears to me, I'm acknowledging that I might not have all the information. These small signals make communication smoother.
That's beautifully put. From my perspective, it also shows respect for other people's viewpoints. When you say, the way I see it, instead of stating something as absolute fact, you're leaving room for others to disagree. You're creating space for dialogue. I'm of the opinion that this is especially important in diverse environments where people come from different cultures and backgrounds.
Let's talk about some specific phrases that our listeners can start using today. Ria, what are your go-to alternatives to I think?
Oh, I have so many, but let me start with the ones I use most often. In my view, is probably my favorite because it works in almost any situation. Whether you're talking to your boss, your friends, or even strangers, it sounds natural and appropriate. For instance, if someone asks me about a restaurant, I might say, in my view, the pasta there is outstanding, but the service can be slow. It's clear, it's personal, and it doesn't sound pretentious.
That's a great one. I also love "it seems to me" because it has this gentle quality. From where I sit, it's perfect for situations where you want to be tactful. Let's say your friend is considering a job offer and you have some concerns. You could say, "It seems to me that the salary is great, but the commute might be exhausting." You're sharing your thoughts without being pushy.
Yes, and that brings up another phrase I use constantly. From what I can tell. This one is especially useful when you're basing your opinion on limited information. For example, from what I can tell, the project is going well, but I haven't seen the latest numbers. It's honest and humble. As I see it, being honest about the limits of your knowledge actually makes you sound more credible, not less.
That's such an important point. Native speakers don't pretend to know everything. They acknowledge uncertainty, and that's actually a sign of intelligence and maturity. Another phrase I find incredibly useful is "I'm convinced that." This one is for when you feel strongly about something. In my estimation, it's more powerful than just saying "I think" because it shows conviction. For instance, I'm convinced that regular practice is the key to fluency in any language.
Oh, I love that one. It has real weight to it. And speaking of conviction, what about "there's no doubt in my mind"? That's even stronger. When you say that, you're expressing absolute certainty. I remember using it once when a friend was nervous about starting their own business. I told them, "There's no doubt in my mind that you have what it takes to succeed." It was reassuring and powerful.
Beautiful example. Now let's think about more casual, everyday phrases. When I'm talking with friends, I often use "the way I see it." It's relaxed and conversational. Like if we're discussing which movie to watch, I might say, "The way I see it, comedies are perfect for Friday nights." It's laid back, but still expresses a clear preference.
Exactly. And for something even more casual, there's "if you ask me." This one has a bit of personality to it. It's like you're offering your opinion with a smile. For example, if you ask me, learning English through podcasts is way more effective than memorizing grammar rules. It sounds friendly and engaging, doesn't it?
It does. And here's something fascinating. Some phrases work better in written English, while others are more natural in spoken conversations. From my standpoint, "in my opinion" is great for emails and formal writing, but in casual speech, it can sound a bit stiff. On the other hand, "I reckon" is very colloquial and works perfectly in relaxed conversations, especially in British English or Australian English.
That's such a good distinction to make. I'm of the belief that context is everything. You wouldn't say "I reckon" in a business presentation, but at a pub with friends, it's perfect. Similarly, "from my perspective" sounds professional and thoughtful, so it's ideal for workplace discussions or academic settings. The key is reading the room, understanding who you're talking to, and what the situation calls for.
Let's dig deeper into the emotional aspect of these phrases. Ria, have you noticed how different phrases can convey different feelings? Like, when I say "it appears to me," there's a sense of observation and careful consideration. But when I say "I'm absolutely certain," there's passion and urgency.
Oh, absolutely. The way I understand it, language isn't just about conveying information, it's about conveying feeling and intention. When someone says, "it strikes me that," they're not just sharing a thought, they're sharing a realization, almost like a light bulb moment. For example, "it strikes me that we've been approaching this problem all wrong." There's energy in that phrase.
That's brilliant. And what about "as far as I'm concerned"? That one has a definitive quality to it. When I use it, I'm basically saying, "this is my final stance on the matter." Like, as far as I'm concerned, honesty is always the best policy no matter what. It closes the door on debate in a confident way.
Yes, and it can also sound defensive if you're not careful. From my point of view, tone and body language matter just as much as the words themselves. If you say, as far as I'm concerned, with a warm smile, it sounds confident. If you say it with crossed arms and a sharp tone, it sounds stubborn. This is why practicing these phrases out loud is so important. You need to hear how they sound coming out of your own mouth.
That's such practical advice. Let me ask you this. When you were learning these phrases, did you ever mix them up or use them incorrectly? I know I certainly did.
Oh my goodness, all the time. I remember once saying, from my point of view, in a situation where I should have said, from what I can tell. I was talking about something I had only heard secondhand, but I made it sound like I had direct knowledge. My colleague politely corrected me, and I was so embarrassed. But you know what? That mistake taught me more than any textbook ever could. It seems to me that making mistakes in real conversations is how we truly learn.
I couldn't agree more. I once used "I'm convinced that" when discussing a movie I hadn't even seen yet. I was just repeating what a friend had told me. Someone called me out on it, and I realized I needed to be more careful about matching my phrases to my actual level of certainty. From that point on, I became much more aware of the subtle differences between these expressions.
That's such valuable self-awareness. And you know what I find really empowering? Once you master these phrases, you can use them to navigate difficult conversations with grace. Let's say someone asks your opinion on a sensitive topic, maybe politics or religion. If you're not comfortable sharing your full thoughts, you can say something like, "It's hard to say," or, "From what I understand, there are valid points on both sides." You're contributing to the conversation without overcommitting.
That's incredibly smart. In my experience, these phrases are like social tools. They help you maintain relationships while still being authentic. I had a situation last year where a friend asked me what I thought of their new haircut. And honestly, I didn't love it, but I didn't want to hurt their feelings. So I said, "It's definitely bold. From where I'm standing, it suits your adventurous personality." I was truthful without being hurtful.
Oh, that's the perfect example of diplomatic honesty. The truth is, communication is rarely just about facts. It's about feelings, relationships, and connection. I'm of the mind that learning these phrases helps you become not just a better English speaker, but a better communicator overall. You become more thoughtful, more empathetic, more aware of how your words affect others.
Let's give our listeners some specific scenarios where they can practice these phrases. Ria, imagine you're in a job interview, and the interviewer asks, "What do you think is your greatest weakness?" How would you answer without saying, "I think"?
Great question. I'd probably say something like, in my view, I can sometimes be a perfectionist, which means I spend extra time on details. However, I've learned to balance quality with efficiency. See how, in my view, makes it sound thoughtful and self-aware? It's not arrogant, but it's not overly humble either.
Perfect answer. Here's another scenario. You're having dinner with friends, and they're debating whether to go to the beach or the mountains for a vacation. You prefer the mountains, but you don't want to sound pushy. What would you say?
I'd probably go with something casual and friendly. If you ask me, the mountains this time of year are absolutely stunning. The weather is perfect for hiking, and it's usually less crowded than the beach. But honestly, I'll be happy with whatever we decide. That way, I'm sharing my preference without steamrolling the conversation.
Excellent. And here's a trickier one. Imagine your coworker presents an idea in a meeting that you think has some serious flaws. You need to voice your concerns, but you don't want to shut them down completely. How do you handle it?
This is where these phrases really shine. I might say, from my perspective, there's a lot of potential in this idea. At the same time, it seems to me that we might face some challenges with implementation, particularly around the budget and timeline. What if we explored some alternative approaches? See how I balanced acknowledgement with concern? I used from my perspective to introduce my thoughts. It seems to me to soften the criticism, and then ended with a collaborative question.
That's textbook perfect. You are honest without being harsh, and you kept the door open for dialogue. As I see it, that's the real magic of these phrases. They help you be direct without being blunt, honest without being brutal. They give you control over not just what you say, but how you say it.
Exactly. And here's something I want to emphasize to our listeners. Don't try to memorize all these phrases at once. In my estimation, it's better to master 2 or 3 and use them naturally than to awkwardly shoehorn 10 different phrases into one conversation. Start with the ones that feel most comfortable to you.
That's brilliant advice. When I was learning, I started with just, in my view, and it seems to me. I used them everywhere until they felt completely natural. Then I gradually added from my perspective, and I'm convinced that it's like building muscle. You start with light weights and gradually increase. From where I'm standing, consistency matters more than variety when you're first learning.
Absolutely. And here's the practice technique that worked wonders for me. Every night before bed, I'd think about 3 opinions I had that day and reframe them using different phrases. Like, if I caught myself saying, I think the weather is nice, I'd rephrase it as, in my view, this weather is perfect, or it seems to me that we are having the best weather this week. It sounds simple, but that daily practice made these phrases second nature.
I love that technique. It's so practical and doesn't require any special resources, just your own thoughts and a few minutes of reflection. Let me add another practice idea. When you're watching English TV shows or movies, pay attention to how characters express their opinions. You'll notice that confident, articulate characters rarely say, I think. They use phrases like clearly, obviously, without question, or there's no doubt about it.
Oh, yes. And different characters use different phrases based on their personality and background. A business person might say, from a strategic standpoint, while a scientist might say, based on the evidence, or from what the data shows. A creative person might say, the way I envision it, or in my imagination. As far as I can tell, these phrases reveal character and expertise.
That's such a sophisticated observation. And it brings up something important. As you become more advanced in English, you can start using field-specific phrases that show your expertise. If you work in finance, you might say, from a fiscal perspective, or in terms of ROI. If you're in education, you might say, from a pedagogical standpoint, or based on learning theory. These specialized phrases make you sound professional and knowledgeable.
Exactly. But here's my caution. Don't use jargon just to sound smart. From my point of view, authenticity always trumps impressiveness. If you're talking to someone outside your field, stick to phrases everyone understands. The goal is communication, not intimidation. I'm convinced that the best speakers are those who can explain complex ideas in simple, clear language.
Wise words, Ria. Now, I want to address something that might be on our listeners' minds. What if English isn't your first language and you're worried about making mistakes with these phrases? What would you say to someone who feels nervous about trying them?
Oh, I'd say this. Mistakes are proof that you're learning. Every native speaker made countless mistakes when they were learning to speak as children. The difference is they didn't have an inner critic telling them they sounded stupid. From what I've observed, the biggest obstacle for adult language learners isn't ability, it's fear. Fear of judgment, fear of embarrassment, fear of not being perfect.
That resonates so deeply with me. I remember being terrified to speak English in front of native speakers. I'd rehearse sentences in my head, trying to make them perfect, and by the time I was ready to speak, the conversation had moved on. It seems to me that perfectionism is the enemy of progress when it comes to language learning.
Absolutely. And here's what I wish someone had told me earlier. Native speakers make mistakes too. They use the wrong phrase, they mispronounce words, they forget what they were saying mid-sentence. But they don't stop talking. They laugh it off and continue. In my view, confidence isn't about being perfect, it's about being comfortable with imperfection.
That's so liberating to hear. And you know what? Using these alternative phrases actually made me more confident, not less. When I stopped relying on I think for everything, I felt like I had more tools in my toolbox. From my standpoint, it was like learning to cook. Once you master more than one recipe, you feel like a real chef, not just someone who can make scrambled eggs.
What a perfect analogy. And just like cooking, the more you practice, the more intuitive it becomes. Eventually, you don't have to consciously think, should I say, in my view, or it seems to me? You just know, based on the context and your intention. It becomes part of your natural speaking pattern. As I see it, that's when you know you've truly internalized these phrases.
Let's talk about written English for a moment. Do these phrases work differently in writing compared to speaking?
Great question. From my experience, written English tends to be slightly more formal. So phrases like, in my opinion, from my perspective, and it is my belief that work really well in essays, emails, and reports. Conversely, phrases like, if you ask me, or the way I see it, might sound too casual for formal writing, but they're perfect for blogs, social media posts, or friendly emails.
That's an important distinction. I'd add that in academic or professional writing, you might even want to go further and use phrases like, this paper argues that, or the evidence suggests that, instead of personal opinion phrases. But in everyday emails to colleagues or friends, phrases like, from where I'm sitting, or in my estimation, strike the right balance between professional and personable.
Exactly. And here's something I find interesting. Some cultures are more direct when expressing opinions. In some places, saying, I'm absolutely certain, might be seen as confident, while in others, it might be perceived as arrogant. It appears to me that understanding these cultural nuances is part of becoming truly fluent in English, especially if you're using it in an international context.
That's such a thoughtful point. I've worked with people from all over the world, and I've noticed that British English speakers often use more tentative phrases like, it might be the case that, or one could argue that, while American English speakers tend to be more direct with phrases like clearly or without a doubt. Neither is better, they're just different communication styles.
And that's the beauty of English. It's flexible enough to accommodate different personalities and cultural backgrounds. From my standpoint, the key is to find phrases that feel authentic to you. Don't try to sound like someone you're not. If you're naturally thoughtful and measured, phrases like, it seems to me, and from what I understand, will suit you. If you're passionate and assertive, phrases like, I'm convinced that, and there's no question that, might feel more natural.
I love that advice. Be yourself, just in English. That's ultimately what fluency is about. Being able to express your true self, your real thoughts and feelings in another language. And these phrases are tools to help you do that more effectively and authentically. In my view, that's worth all the practice and effort.
Absolutely. And speaking of effort, let's give our listeners a challenge. For the next week, try to go an entire day without saying, I think. Every time you're about to say it, pause and choose a different phrase. It might feel awkward at first, but I promise you, by the end of the week, these alternatives will start flowing naturally. As far as I'm concerned, there's no better way to learn than through deliberate practice.
That's an excellent challenge. And here's another one. Keep a little notebook or use your phone to collect phrases you hear native speakers using. When you watch a movie, listen to a podcast, or have a conversation, jot down interesting ways people express their opinions. Over time, you'll build your own personal collection of phrases that resonate with you. From my perspective, this active listening and collecting transforms you from a passive learner into an active observer of language.
I love that idea. And you know what? Share your progress with friends or fellow English learners. Language learning doesn't have to be solitary. The way I see it, when you practice with others, you learn faster, stay motivated, and actually have fun with it. Maybe start a study group where everyone has to use a different opinion phrase in each sentence. It'll be challenging at first, but also hilarious and memorable.
That sounds like a blast. And speaking of community, I want to remind our listeners that mistakes and awkward moments are part of the journey. I once accidentally said, from my point of view, instead of from my point of view in a presentation. Everyone laughed, including me, and then we moved on. That moment didn't define me. What defined me was that I kept speaking, kept trying, kept improving. It seems to me that resilience is just as important as vocabulary when learning a language.
That's such an important message. And Tom, your story reminds me of something. Humor and humility go a long way. When you can laugh at your own mistakes, you take the pressure off yourself, and that's when real learning happens. I'm of the opinion that the people who become truly fluent are not the ones who never make mistakes, but the ones who make mistakes cheerfully and learn from them.
Beautifully said, Tama. And as we wrap up today's episode, I want to leave our listeners with one final thought. Learning to express your opinions in different ways isn't just about sounding more sophisticated or native-like. It's about giving yourself permission to take up space in conversations, to contribute your thoughts with confidence, and to connect with people on a deeper level. From where I stand, that's what language is really for: connection, understanding, and expressing the fullness of who you are.
That's perfect, Tom. And I would add this. Every phrase you learn, every mistake you make, every conversation you have is bringing you closer to fluency. In my view, you're not just learning English, you're expanding your world, opening doors, and giving yourself opportunities you never had before. So be patient with yourself, celebrate your progress, and remember that every native speaker was once a beginner too.
Thank you so much for joining us today on Real English Voices. We hope this conversation has inspired you to experiment with new ways of expressing your opinions. Remember, you don't have to say, "I think," ever again if you don't want to. You have so many other options now.
And if you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and share it with anyone who's learning English. We love hearing from you, so leave us a comment telling us which opinion phrase you're going to start using this week. As far as I'm concerned, hearing your stories and progress is what makes this podcast so rewarding.
Until next time, keep practicing, keep speaking, and most importantly, keep believing in yourself. From my perspective, you're capable of amazing things, and fluency is absolutely within your reach.
Thanks for listening, everyone. This is Ria and Tom reminding you that your voice matters, your opinions matter, and the world is waiting to hear what you have to say, in English or any language. See you in the next episode.